Hi everyone, here's the 4.5 video you have been looking for to review graphing the sine of x since we've been on winter break and need a nice little refresher. I will follow this with a video on graphing the cosine of x, which is our section 4.5b. So to be entirely honest here, I should say this is practice 4.5a, and put a little note up here, make sure my writing tablet is working appropriately. So far it's not connected. Go up here. You got to turn the Bluetooth on for that to work. All right, now let's see. There we go, we're connected. Okay, so this is 4.5a, which we've covered, but this is just so that you'll have a video to watch to refresh. Okay, we have to remember that when graphing y equals the sine of x, that we start with a basic amplitude of 1, and that the period is going to be 2 pi, and it has no phase shift to begin with, okay? So that when we go over here and do this problem, we're looking at a general form that looks something like this. A is for amplitude, and it's multiplied in front of the function, and bx plus c is possible for the rest of the argument. And so we would say A is amplitude, and period, if we're gonna mess around with x and put a number in front of it, put a coefficient there multiplying x, it's going to change our period. We're going to take that number b, that is the coefficient of x, and divide it into 2 pi, and simplify that, and that'll be our new period, okay? And then finally, if there's a phase shift, we will be able to determine how far to shift it by taking the c number, the number that is added or subtracted to the argument, dividing it by b, just like we divided 2 pi by b up here, and when we simplify that, that will be our phase shift. Then we have to go opposite the direction of the sign, the SIGN sign up here, opposite the sign, so that plus actually ends up being left and minus actually ends up being right. Alrighty, so that's just a reminder of the basic ideas in graphing here. So let's practice this one right here. Right away we need, as a very first thing, to write out amplitude, period, and phase shift. Now, you don't have to write these out unless you're told to, but it's a good idea to get into the habit. The amplitude A is simply the coefficient of the sine function, which is 3. And the period is going to be 2 pi over b. b in this case is 2. And it's okay to put this up here if that helps. b is 2. 2 pi over b is going to end up being 2 pi over 2. And the pi's will cancel, or excuse me, the 2's will cancel out, leaving pi. So our period is pi. And the phase shift, c over b, will end up being c is pi, b is 2. We'll have a phase shift of pi over 2. The negative means left, opposite that means we're going to go right. Okay, now, the way I taught you to graph, your basic pattern, you have a 5-dot pattern. The beginning of the period has a dot, the end of the period has a dot, and it's your job to find the middle and mark it with a dot. And then halfway between the beginning and the middle, you go up to a peak, and then halfway between the beginning, or the middle and the end, you go down to a valley, and that produces your upward swoop and your downward swoop pattern. Okay, you've got to remember this pattern as the sine pattern and use it to help you graph. All right, so our 3 steps. First of all, we label the axes, both the x and y axes. So we're going to need 1, 2, 3 for the maximum wave height, down to -3 because it goes just as low as it goes high. And then we're going to have to mark off 2 periods. Our period is pi, so I'm going to put, I like to put an even number of boxes for a period because it's easy to find the middle that way. So if I'm going to do 1 period here, I could go another period to the right, or since I'm running out of room, I'm going to do one to the left and put -pi. okay, negative. And so I'm going to need to fit it in twice in this space, and then ultimately I'm going to shift it left pi over 2, which I will do in a different color so you can see the final answer. All right, so I do my first period. I put the dot at the beginning of the period at 0 for sign, and at the end of the period, then I have to mark the middle with a period, a dot, whatever you prefer to call it. Now, halfway between the beginning and the middle, I go up to my max. And halfway between the middle and the end, I go down to my min. And there's the pattern for drawing a single period. Okay, pardon the quality of the drawing on this electronic tablet. All right, I know I'm going to do the other one to the other side. I'm going to go ahead and put my arrow on this end. And so I repeat the same pattern. There's the beginning of the period. There's the end of the period. Mark those with dots. Mark the middle with a dot. Then halfway over, I go max. Halfway between middle and end, I go min. And then I can draw it again. Now, I can do this in 2 colors easily, so I'm not making this dotted. But it's going to have to be shifted, and I'm going to go ahead and do that in another color. So I'm going to do the final graph in red here. Every one of these points has got to be shifted pi over 2 to the right. Well, how far is pi over 2? If this is pi right here, then half of that is 2 boxes. So that's pi over 2. You need to mark all the places where it crosses the x-axis, 0 and negative pi over 2, so that you can see your way to shifting them. Everything's got to go right, pi over 2 units, which is 2 boxes. So here goes. This dot goes here. This dot up here goes right 2 boxes. This dot down here goes right 2 boxes. This one goes right 2 boxes. This one goes right 2 boxes. The black one that's under here goes right 2 boxes. This one goes right 2 boxes. And the black one that's under here goes right 2 boxes. So now I can draw my final version. If you will draw these dots, actually it should have gone right through the middle there, shouldn't it? I left off a red dot. And so if you draw most of the pattern and you make a mistake, you skip a dot, you can pretty much see where you left it out and draw it right anyway. So I get 2 periods in there. You're always required to draw 2 periods, which is 2 upward bumps and 2 downward bumps for 2 periods of sine. So the graph y equals 3 sine of 2x minus pi is here in red. Alrighty. Let's try another one. This will be faster because I won't have to explain everything. I will just go through the motions. I will say that instead of having our upward bump and then our downward bump, the first thing I notice is a minus sign, which means that we're going to go down first and then up. Okay. My amplitude is going to be 3. Always express that as a positive number. Period, 2 pi over b. In this case, that's going to be 2 pi over 2, same as last time, which is pi. And phase shift is going to be left, opposite the plus sign. And c is pi over 2 divided by b, which is 2, which is the same thing as pi over 2. Flip the 2 and make it a half and multiply. So phase shift left, pi over 4. Okay. At some point we're going to get creative and be able to shift it and draw it one time. If you're already there, go for it. If you still need to see a couple more drawn and then shifted, I'm doing that still for the next time or two. All right, label x and y axes. Actually, I didn't finish my list on the previous page, did I? Let me be thorough. Label axes 2, draw 2 periods, always. And 3, put your arrows on the end of the curve. All right, let's go through those 3 steps over here. Label the axes. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 down, because the amplitude is 3, same as the last one, coincidental. The period is pi, so I'm going to go over, like I said, I like to make an even number of boxes, pi, because it's fine. You can make an odd number, you just have to remember to split things in half in the middle of a box. I'm going to go ahead and do the other period over here, pi, negative pi. I could just as easily go to the right if I preferred. And then ultimately I'll shift everything left pi over 4, so I have to mark a few more things so I'll know. So half of pi would be pi over 2, which means that pi over 4 is right there. Okay, pi over 4. So I'm going to end up shifting everything one box. Okay, and there's my negative pi over 4, if you want to see that. So 4, not 2, and negative pi over 2. So I label as much as it's helpful for me. I'm requiring you to label everywhere it crosses the x-axis before you shift it, and not just one box. You must label multiple points on the x-axis. All right. So we labeled our axes. We need to draw 2 periods. Okay, remember I said we were going to dip down first and then up because this was a negative curve. So a sign, we always start at 0, mark the beginning of the period. Oh, let me do this in another color. It'll be easier to follow. Blue. We're going to mark the beginning of the period, the end of the period, and the middle, right on the x-axis. So for this one, instead of going halfway over and up, we're going to go halfway over and down. Here, halfway over up. All right, and then if you want to go ahead and mark the other period, you can just draw the whole curve at once. Beginning of the period, end of the period, middle. All right, a quarter of the way, halfway to the middle is down, and halfway to the end is up. And I can actually go ahead and draw my curve in. Notice it matters more that the points are in the right place than that your curve is perfectly smooth. I do not want to see points. Don't draw V's with real pointy points. I do not want to see this because they're not pointy like that, okay? I want to see curves. And then finally, I've got to shift everything one box left. So let me do that in green. So moving everything left 1. Like I said, you might be getting to where you could do this shifting without drawing the curve twice, and that's fine. That's a good skill to have. I think if you're sticking with my 5-dot method, that's more possible. It's easier to think about. Okay, I've still got to go down first, so here it goes. Final graph, down, that's terrible. Down, up, down, up. It's not so great, but there we go. Down, and finally put arrows on the ends. So my final graph is green. Okay, I'm going to do one more. Let's see. Our amplitude in this case is 2 here, and it's a positive curve, so we're going to go up first and then down. Period is 2 pi over b. B in this case is, what is this? 1, right? Because we don't have any other number there. So 2 pi over 1 is just 2 pi. I can write that in so you'll see that. And then phase shift, C over B is pi over 1, which is just pi. And we're going to go opposite of the negative sign would be right, pi units. All right, so I'm going to show you this one without having to draw it twice, just so you can see. When I go to label the x-axes, of course, or x and y-axes, of course I label the easy stuff first, up to and down to -2. Then, my period is 2 pi. So if I go over here and I make this 2 pi, and make this over here 1, 2, 3, 4, -2 pi. And I know I'm going to shift everything pi units to the right, and pi ends up being halfway point, halfway to 2 pi is 1 pi. So pi is 2 squares to the right. So everything's got to move 2 squares to the right. Let me go ahead and draw in. Instead of starting at 0, then I'll put my beginning dot of my period at pi. And then I've got to do 2 pi units to the right. Well, pi plus 2 pi puts me here, where 3 pi is. Okay. So if I go ahead and put my beginning dot and my end dot shifted pi units to the right, see, normally it would have been here and here. See how they're both shifted 2 boxes to the right? Then I will have done my phase shift all at the same time, and I don't have to draw it twice. Okay, so let's finish that pattern in red. Beginning of the period, end of the period, middle of the period, all on the x-axis. Well, the red doesn't show, there we go. And then we're going up first, so halfway to the first, to 2 pi, we're going to go up to 2. And then halfway between the middle and the end, we're going to go down to -2. Okay, and then I can draw it in. So it's a good bet to draw in one period at a time, just to make sure you put it in the right place. Okay, now, if I'm going to do another period off the other direction, I know it's got to be 4 boxes wide. That's from 1 pi to 3 pi was, the difference is 2 pi. So I've got to go 4 boxes left. 1, 2, 3, 4 to make it just as wide as the other curve. Beginning of the period, end of the period, middle of the period. Mark those with the dots on the x-axis. Then halfway from beginning to middle, I go up. Halfway from middle to end, I go down. And I draw it in. And I've done my phase shift and my period and my amplitude all in the same graph. And I just have one picture, put my arrows on the end, and I'm done. Okay, there's your walkthrough of graphing sine of x.